Huawei now is planning mass shipments of its own AI chip.
Some of those chips are being built inside China by SMIC, that is China's leading chip maker.
In a stunning escalation of the global tech war, China has made its boldest move yet, cutting off all cooperation with Western semiconductor giants ASML and TSMC. This wasn't a symbolic protest or a negotiating tactic. It was a calculated severance, a geopolitical earthquake that could reshape the future of technology, trade, and global power for decades to come. Within hours, the U.S. tech industry began bleeding. $5.5 billion in market value vanished, and that was just the beginning. Just 72 hours prior, the Dutch government, under intense pressure from Washington, revoked ASML's export license for advanced lithography machines destined for China, tools worth over $15 billion. This unilateral move, intended to isolate China technologically, backfired spectacularly. Beijing didn't blink. Instead, it responded with a full break from its former chip suppliers, marking the end of decades of cooperation and the beginning of what some are calling a new Cold War. This time, fought not with missiles, but microchips. For years, China was the world's biggest customer for advanced lithography systems, importing over $2.6 billion from ASML in 2023 alone. But when the West tightened the noose, through sanctions, export bans, and talent restrictions, Beijing quietly built a war chest. Between 2022 and 2024, it poured more than $75 billion into its domestic chip industry, recruited over 50,000 engineers, and laid the groundwork for a future without Western dependencies. This wasn't desperation, it was a deliberate countdown to rupture. And now, that countdown has hit zero. With ASML support services cut off, billions of dollars of critical infrastructure in China were rendered useless overnight. But instead of retreating, Beijing doubled down. Shenzhen-based firm Seeker announced a breakthrough in DUV-based lithography that, if validated, could allow China to manufacture sub-7 nm chips without ever needing ASML's EUV machines. Meanwhile, SMIC, China's leading foundry, is pushing toward 5 nm and even experimenting with 3 nm production through quad patterning and AI-assisted yield tuning. These advances, once thought impossible without Western technology, are now reality, or close to it, and the impact is already measurable. Huawei's 2023 launch of the Mate 60 Pro, a smartphone powered by a 7 nm chip made entirely with pre-band tools, shocked the industry, not just because of the technology, but because of what it represented, proof that China could innovate under siege. By Q4 of 2024, China's reliance on imported high-performance chips dropped from 85% to under 60%. SMIC's market share alone surged from 5% in 2020 to 19.3% in 2024, a seismic shift in global supply chains. At the same time, ASML's China revenues collapsed, plunging 27% year-over-year. TSMC, too, is facing long-term losses as Chinese manufacturers ditch Taiwanese partnerships in favor of homegrown alternatives. And while the West is still debating tariffs and regulations, China is moving its chess pieces, fast. But this is no longer just a tech war. Beijing has begun weaponizing capital. According to financial sources, China is quietly offloading U.S. tech stocks and treasury bonds, not in panic but in waves. Each sale is calculated, each divestment timed to destabilize without triggering alarms. If this tactic spreads, retirement funds, mortgage rates, and entire financial systems could become collateral damage. This is not just decoupling, it's financial warfare by another name. China's surge isn't limited to foundries and fabrication. Patent filings tell their own story. In 2024 alone, Chinese firms filed over 21,000 semiconductor-related patents, a 34% year-over-year increase. This isn't just about making chips, it's about owning the future of chips. It's a declaration of sovereignty in an industry once monopolized by the West. The question now is simple and terrifying. Has the West overplayed its hand? U.S. policymakers once believed export bans would kneecap China's ambitions. Instead, they lit a fire. Every embargo, every restriction became fuel. The result? A Chinese semiconductor ecosystem that is not just surviving, but thriving. And it's no longer playing catch-up. It's rewriting the rules. As the world watches, a new technological order is being born, one where the U.S. may no longer sit at the top. This isn't just a chip story, it's a global realignment. And we're already feeling the tremors. Who will control the silicon? And the power that comes with it, because what's coming next might just change everything.
We're going to make a deal, and we'll have a deal. I think we have
Mr. President?
I think we're going to make a very good deal.
Has he called you directly?
Pretty obvious that he has, but we will talk about that soon. It's not that important because, honestly, we're going to have a deal.
America stands on the brink of a pivotal crossroads in its economic battle with China. Donald Trump, president whose trade war reshaped global commerce, has boldly declared his intent to substantially cut tariffs on Chinese goods if China meets his demands. The stakes for American workers, businesses, and the global economy have never been higher. The conflict between the United States and China erupted into a full-scale trade war in July 2018, when the Trump administration imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars in Chinese imports. China shot back with its own duties, escalating economic tension between the world's two largest economies. As of April 2025, these tariffs, altered only slightly by the Biden administration, remain a central pillar of U.S. trade policy. On April 23, 2025, Donald Trump set the economic world ablaze with his interview in Time magazine, stating unequivocally, "I would cut tariffs very substantially if they do what we want." This bold announcement marks the first time Trump has openly discussed the possibility of rolling back tariffs that defined his presidency, contingent, he insisted, on Chinese compliance with unspecified U.S. demands. Trump's trade war began with tariffs on a staggering $360 billion worth of Chinese imports, targeting industries from steel and machinery to electronics and consumer goods. In retaliation, China levied duties on $110 billion worth of American products, hammering U.S. farmers and manufacturers alike. "We have tremendous economic power over China," Trump told Time magazine, emphasizing the leverage he believes these trade barriers provide. Despite his departure from office, Trump's tariffs have not only endured, but have become a bipartisan mainstay. The Biden administration, while reviewing aspects of the policy as early as May 2022, has kept most tariffs firmly in place. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen acknowledged in March 2024 that some tariffs were under review, but admitted no major changes had yet been made. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, tariff rates on Chinese goods had soared to about 19% by early 2025, over 6 times greater than they were before the trade war began, when average rates hovered near 3%. The heart of Trump's pitch lies not only in trade mechanics but in power politics. During his Time interview, Trump asserted, "We have tremendous economic power over China." This remark illustrates his conviction that tariffs provide the U.S. with strategic leverage in negotiating favorable economic and political outcomes. The power struggle between these two nations has roiled global supply chains and forced multinational corporations to reassess their business strategies, directly influencing jobs, prices, and investment in America. Yet, Trump's approach has not escaped fierce domestic scrutiny. Critics argue that tariffs have burdened American consumers with higher prices and disrupted U.S. industries reliant on Chinese components. Industry analysts point to the ripple effects across the global economy, fueling inflation, complicating diplomatic relations, and sowing uncertainty for U.S. exporters caught in China's retaliatory crossfire. These voices contend that a return to lower tariffs without concrete changes from China could jeopardize vital American interests. Still, for Trump and his supporters, the tariffs represent a potent tool for enforcement. They believe the duties forced China to the negotiating table and demonstrated a willingness to confront persistent grievances, from intellectual property theft to unfair industrial subsidies. In their view, Trump's readiness to cut tariffs, conditional on Chinese action, signals strength, a willingness to reward compliance as much as punish defiance. The Biden administration's cautious maintenance of the status quo underscores the delicate balancing act. Tariffs offer obvious leverage but inflict pain at home. As Janet Yellen acknowledged in March 2024, many tariffs were under review, but every decision carries major implications for businesses, workers, and consumers. The ongoing review, announced in May 2022, has yet to produce sweeping changes, pointing to the policy's entrenched position in the U.S. economic arsenal. At its core, the debate pits economic opportunity against the risk of strategic vulnerability. Should the U.S. leverage tariffs to pressure China and protect its own industries? Or does the collateral damage outweigh any possible gains? Trump's proposal to cut tariffs, dependent on Chinese concessions, sits at the nexus of this dilemma, offering the tantalizing prospect of relief for American consumers and industries, yet threatening the primary tool the U.S. has wielded to shape China's behavior. The implications reverberate far beyond the negotiating table. As of April 2025, American tariffs on Chinese goods remain at historic highs, distorting markets and straining diplomatic ties. Any move to reduce these barriers would signal a major change in U.S. policy, with consequences for inflation, trade flows, and America's posture on the world stage. Whether Trump's promise to cut tariffs very substantially becomes reality may rest on complex negotiations and the willingness of both nations to make concessions. The outcome will determine not just the cost of goods on American shelves, but the future of economic power in the 21st century.
President Trump, $108 billion investment from chip makers.
In just 48 hours, more than $100 billion was wiped off Intel's market value, not because of a global crash or a scandal, but because Beijing made a quiet, calculated move. On April 12, 2025, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology issued a new policy that sent shockwaves across Silicon Valley. A total ban on U.S.-made semiconductors for all government agencies and major state-backed firms. This wasn't a reaction. It was a surgical strike aimed directly at the heart of America's tech empire. With the stroke of a pen, China eliminated Intel, AMD, and Micron from its national procurement system, crippling the American chip sector's access to one of its most profitable markets. For Intel, the consequences were immediate and brutal. Nearly 27% of its 2024 revenue, around $22 billion, came from Chinese clients. By the end of the second trading day after the announcement, Intel stock had plummeted 18.3%. The ripple effect didn't stop there. Major chip ETFs like SOX and SMH tumbled 4.2% and 2% respectively. But this wasn't just a market reaction. It was a symbol of something far more serious, a fundamental shift in the global tech balance of power. This wasn't simply decoupling, it was dismantling. A dismantling of U.S. dominance in semiconductors and the quiet emergence of a parallel system, one no longer dependent on American innovation. The decline of Intel didn't start in April. It had been in slow motion for over a decade. In 2011, Intel commanded 80% of the global PC processor market. By Q4 of 2024, that number had dropped to just 57%. A string of critical missteps, especially delays in 10nm and 7nm production, allowed competitors like AMD to reclaim market share, while tech giants like Apple and Amazon turned to custom silicon. Intel's financials reflected the fall, a $2.8 billion loss in Q1 2023, followed by a staggering $8 billion loss in Q4 2024. The once indomitable chipmaker had already been weakened. Beijing's move merely finished what years of complacency had started. Then came the bombshell that changed everything. Huawei wasn't finished. In September 2024, Tech Insights revealed that Huawei's new Mate 70 Pro smartphone was powered by a domestically produced 5nm Kirin chip, built by SMIC using older DUV lithography, not the banned EUV machines. This shouldn't have been possible. Yet somehow, without ASML's most advanced tools, SMIC had cracked the code. The Mate 70 Pro defied expectations, sold 45 million units in just 6 months, and proved one thing beyond doubt. China no longer needed the United States to build cutting-edge chips. While the U.S. tried to choke off China's access to technology, China was quietly refining, scaling, and executing with precision. As Huawei rose, Intel fell. The company's data center revenue dropped 22% in Q1 2025. Meanwhile, SMIC's soared by 47%, fueled by state-backed procurement and a newfound national confidence. This wasn't just a commercial development, it was a strategic breakthrough. What began as sanctions and restrictions evolved into a full-blown tech war, and China had just scored a major win. But the most dangerous threat wasn't technological, it was systemic. According to leaked documents reviewed by Reuters, China has set a 2027 deadline to completely eliminate U.S.-sourced semiconductors from its infrastructure. A program dubbed Clean Silicon now mandates that 80% of China's central government computing systems use domestic chips by early 2026. If China succeeds, it will establish a global precedent that the semiconductor industry no longer needs American technology to survive or thrive. This is a tectonic shift with global implications. Nations from Brazil to Indonesia to parts of Europe may follow suit, inspired by China's defiance. Can Intel recover? The U.S. Chips and Science Act has thrown money at the problem. $52.7 billion in federal incentives, $7.86 billion in grants, and $11 billion in loans earmarked for Intel. There's also a multi-billion-dollar deal with Amazon Web Services, but none of this changes the fact that Intel's next-gen 18A node won't be ready until mid-2026. Meanwhile, TSMC and Samsung are already in 3nm production and preparing for 2nm. Intel's massive Silicon Heartland factory in Ohio remains delayed and plagued by construction setbacks. OEMs like Dell and HP have already warned of price hikes between 12% and 17% for Intel-powered hardware. Without China to absorb the output, Intel is cornered, cut production or raise prices. Either way, consumers and global markets lose. This wasn't supposed to happen. The US once held all the cards, the patents, the suppliers, the foundries, the talent. But Huawei, SMIC, and China's semiconductor ecosystem have rewritten the playbook, skipping steps, bypassing restrictions, and succeeding on their own terms. What began as containment has turned into capitulation. And now the question is no longer whether Intel can regain its lead, but whether the US can afford to fall any further behind. This is not a momentary dip, it's a systemic collapse, a warning, and perhaps the start of a new global order, one where America is no longer the center of innovation, but merely a participant in a race it once dominated. What if I told you that one of the most hyped vehicles of the decade, Elon Musk's futuristic Cybertruck, was just officially banned from the roads of one of the world's most powerful economies? And not only that, the very first one to hit the UK streets was seized by police on the spot. Sound unbelievable? It just happened. And the ripple effect could reshape Tesla's future in Europe. The UK has issued a stunning ban on the Tesla Cybertruck, blocking it from being registered or operated on British roads. Police in Greater Manchester enforced the policy without hesitation, confiscating a Cybertruck registered abroad that was seen driving through Whitefield. The move shocked not just Tesla fans, but the global automotive community. Why would a country ban what's seen by many as the most revolutionary electric truck ever built? The answer lies in a combination of strict UK and EU safety regulations, engineering design conflicts, and rising political tensions over cross-border vehicle standards, many of which were intensified by Trump-era trade and regulatory policies. First, the legal grounding. The Cybertruck was seized under Section 165 of the UK Road Traffic Act, which gives police the authority to impound uninsured or non-compliant vehicles. In this case, the core issue was the absence of a European Certificate of Conformity, a critical document required for any road-legal vehicle in the UK or EU. Without that certification, the Cybertruck is officially unfit for UK roads. And it's not just a matter of paperwork, it's the design itself that violates multiple safety requirements. The truck's ultra-rigid stainless steel exoskeleton, though marketed for durability, lacks the crumple zones required to absorb crash impact. According to the European Transport Safety Council, over 20% of road fatalities in the EU involve pedestrians, making pedestrian protection a top regulatory priority. The sharp, angular design of the Cybertruck not only fails to protect, it increases risk. Then there's the weight issue. With a curb weight of over 3,100 kilos, 6,800 pounds, the Cybertruck exceeds the UK's 3,500 kilos limit for standard Category B driver licenses. This would force most UK drivers to obtain a Category C1 license, typically reserved for small commercial trucks. Even without passengers or cargo, the Cybertruck is too heavy for the average British motorist. And things get even more complicated. The steer-by-wire system used by Tesla eliminates the physical connection between the steering wheel and the front wheels, something UK law does not currently permit. Regulations demand a manual fallback mechanism for safety inspections and mechanical control during failure scenarios. The Cybertruck's single LED light bar also violates British headlamp standards, which require separate light housings, proper beam alignment, and minimum height regulations for visibility. Combined, these design choices make the truck fundamentally non-compliant in its current form. To meet UK standards, Tesla would have to redesign major aspects of the Cybertruck, from steering to lighting to crash safety zones. That would cost time, money, and go against Elon Musk's philosophy of maintaining a standardized global product line. Here's where Trump's policies come in. The regulatory split between the US and Europe widened during the Trump administration, which rolled back domestic safety and environmental regulations while increasing tariff pressure on EU automotive imports. The result? A growing divide between what American automakers build and what European countries will accept. Tesla's decision to design the Cybertruck for the US market first, prioritizing occupant protection over pedestrian safety, is a reflection of that regulatory environment. Trump's push to decouple U.S. standards from international norms has, in part, laid the groundwork for these kinds of clashes. As of 2023, the UK accounted for just 2.5% of Tesla's global deliveries, according to Statista. That small market share makes it unlikely Tesla will re-engineer the Cybertruck solely for British or even EU customers, especially if the European New Car Assessment Program, Euro NCAP, also deems it unsafe. While Tesla fans in the UK are disappointed, many had placed pre-orders or hoped to import the vehicle. The message from UK authorities is clear. The Cybertruck, as it stands, is not welcome. Whether Tesla responds by building a Euro-friendly version remains uncertain. This isn't just about one truck. It's a broader philosophical conflict between innovation and regulation, between American industrial boldness and European safety pragmatism. As Tesla continues fulfilling U.S. orders and expanding in markets with looser regulations, one can't help but ask, could this growing divide be the long-term legacy of Trump's tariff-first regulation-light industrial policy? Stay tuned.